Thank you, Laz. Already introduced me. I'm the one without the microphone, which is appropriate. My connection with the critical infrastructure is 4.5 times my career in the critical infrastructure. I started at AT&T, so that gives me telephony back when it was actually hub and spoke. When I moved to MxD, that was UUNet. That was one of the major internet backbones. When I was at Nexus, which was a joint venture between Bank One and US Bank, that was interesting because it collected tax withholding. That was critical infrastructure because should there be a war, you got to pay for it. So there will be a little interesting story on that later. Then I worked for GE Energy while at ThoughtWorks, and I had a short term as interim CISO at University of Chicago Medical Center. So the interesting thing for me, when you cross critical infrastructure, which is quite broad, there are actually some common elements, and hopefully you'll get that as a takeaway. So, introductions.
Hey everybody, my name is Anatoly Badner. I started my career as an application developer, and then I quickly realized that cybersecurity was actually my true calling, and I switched over to the cybersecurity arena. I served as in engineering and architecture capacity in the education sector, following which I've moved into consultancy and advisory, and I've been at Foresight, NTT Security, and now at IBM. And my background and my areas of expertise and focus is AppSec, cloud security, and infrastructure security. So happy to be here. I'm happy to be a part of this conversation and really add value and chime in and answer any questions that some of you might have.
Okay, good morning. My name is Adam Lewis, Director of Product Security at Motorola Solutions, not to be confused with Motor Mobility, who makes the cell phones. I don't have my t-shirt on today, but it usually says I do not work with Rich, different Motorola's. What we do is critical infrastructure though for public safety and first responders.
Hi, I'm Eric Decker. I'm not sure this is on. Green light. Try turning it on. It's had a red light, now it has a green light. This is how you know I'm a CISO. So, CISO for Intermountain Healthcare, which is a large integrated delivery network based in the Mountain West region, although I am here in Chicago. So we have Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, et cetera, et cetera. So what an integrated delivery network is we have both a health plan and the delivery of health care across those 7 states. And as we'll get into later, I also serve in several leadership capacities on critical infrastructure at the federal level with in DC with HHS and CISO.
All right. Good morning. My name is Bruce Coffing. I learned how to turn on the mic from my esteemed colleague here. So I'm the CISO with the City of Chicago. I've been there 4 years, and we operate in 5 critical infrastructure sectors. So if I am going to remember them all, we've got emergency services, so police, fire, emergency medical, and emergency management. We have government sector, which seems kind of like a gimme. It's kind of like the participation trophy. You're in government, so you get your own sector. Then we've got healthcare. So we are what's known as a hybrid, and so we are both in public health and we provide health services. So we have 9 covered entities and 11 business associates for those of you that are HIPAA literate. We are in the transportation sector. So we've got the airports. You've got the 3rd busiest airport by traffic volume and the 28th busiest airport by traffic volume. Combine the two, we're number 2. Closely behind Atlanta. LA is number 2 by itself. And then lastly, water and wastewater. So we provide almost 1 billion gallons of water each and every day to the constituents of the city of Chicago and 125 suburbs in the region. Through 2 water treatment facilities. There's the Jardine Water Treatment Facility that's right next to Navy Pier. It is the world's largest freshwater water treatment facility, as well as Sawyer, which is a few miles south.
Experienced in handling tough questions, so keep it in mind. So for our very first question, let's start with the basics. What is critical infrastructure? And Eric, do you want to take that first?
Sure. So critical infrastructure, when you think about this, most of our critical infrastructure is actually not run by government. So it's actually run by private industry. And because of that, there are national interests in securing that industries for the public good. It could be national security reasons, safety, public health safety reasons, economic reasons, and so forth. So there's actually, at the federal government, and codified into law through various presidential directives, and then finally through an act last year called the National Defense and Authorization Act. There's this construct called the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, or the NIP. They're actually going to change the name of that because the name NIP doesn't sound so great. But within the NIP, there's 16 critical infrastructure that have been identified as, critical industries that have to work with government in order to secure our national interests. And so some examples of that are transportation, energy, water, healthcare, finance, telecommunications, and so forth. You can actually go onto CISA's website and you can see that. That's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency under the Department of Homeland Security. So these definitions themselves have been, as I said, it started off in presidential directives and then eventually was codified. And the way it works is each of the critical infrastructure that's run and owned by private industry has a corresponding government partner based on the various agencies that are inside the federal government. So CISA actually is considered the sector risk management agency for many of the critical infrastructure. But other agencies exist, so like the FTC covers it for finance, Health and Human Services covers it for the healthcare sector, and so forth.
So anybody want to chime in with some clarifications or color commentary on that, Bruce?
Ditto.
What's fun with Bruce is he's on the government side of this, but it's also, so we talked about the 16 critical infrastructure at the federal level, and then you get into state, local, tribal, territorial, and so then that's kind of where Bruce fits, although I don't know how well we've actually activated yet when we get down truly to the state, local level, connecting that all back up, at the federal level. We have some room for growth on all of that.
And at the local level, it almost feels like we are private industry because we are disconnected from the federal government. We do get some federal funding via grants that we are able to do some implementation, but it definitely feels there is that disconnect. I know that CISA is working kind of sector by sector. They've looked at aviation. They're kind of focusing, I think, next year. They started focusing on water this current year, more focused next year. So they're going sector by sector. But there is that disconnect, not from our support partners, so FBI, CISA, et cetera, fantastic, but just feeling like you're a separate organization. You're building your own controls, your own protecting your own infrastructure. I liken it to if you think about a threat to the nation, you've got the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, all protecting the country. But when it comes to cyber, we're kind of on our own. So we're all building our own, protecting our own infrastructure.
One important element of this is actually also that I want to add is the piece that ties it all together is the technology sector, right? So CISA actually, of the 16 sectors that it recognizes as critical infrastructure, technology is one of them. And if we take a look at the role the technology plays nowadays, more and more importantly than ever before, is things are going to the cloud. For example, a lot of critical emergency management services are going to the cloud. A lot of the platforms for that control a lot of the critical infrastructures are now in cloud and obviously technology driven. So there's also a lot of advance that we'll talk about a little bit later on that's happening on the global scale around improving the risk management principles as well as the control principles behind protecting a lot of those factors. So technology, of course, is being a critical infrastructure component, certainly ties it all together.
And I will just echo what Bruce said. It's very interesting, right? Because critical infrastructure is probably one of the only spaces where the federal government would kind of take a stance of telling a private enterprise they need to go up against nation-state threat actors. And that's not to say the federal government doesn't partner to help and to assist, but it's certainly not resourced to provide the kind of protection for critical infrastructure that it would, let's just say, for the nation as a whole in the physical warfare arena.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? And this may be difficult to quantify, but I remember when that law passed, and the first question I had is, what is the roadmap? And where are we at in being successful in protecting all of our infrastructure? If you were having to report to the C-suite and you had your target, where are we at in getting to that target?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. So the question is how well are we doing, across all 16, to summarize it. So the different industries are at different places of maturity on this stage. And in fact, in some states, it's around some industries in the, let me start back. There's two constructs in this whole markup. There's this thing called the Sector Coordinating Council, or the SCC, which represents industry. And then there's the GCC, which is the Government Coordinating Council, which represents the federal government. And at an all hazards level, the SCC and GCC comes together. So it could be around environmental factors, terrorism factors, physical threat factors, cyber factors, pandemic factors, biological factors, and so forth. So when you start talking about how are we doing around protecting critical infrastructure, you have to think about it from the all hazards lens. Some industries have this very well organized. Energy has done a fantastic job, Department of Energy, and the energy sector. Finance has done a fantastic job. Healthcare is actually doing well from the organizational side of it. The activation around cyber is a different story, as you can just read in the news at any given moment. And so, and then there's other industries that literally don't have anything. Like there's agriculture, as an example, has one person with a distribution list, and that's the critical, that's the sector, response to the.
That's just food.
That's just food. Yeah, we don't need food. So various degrees of maturity. Within the White House, there is a gentleman named Chris Inglis, who's the National Cyber Director, and he just established under Biden, although there's been other cyber czars, in the past, under Bush and under Obama. Director Inglis has been charged with bringing conformance around all 16 of these critical infrastructure, and the government working with the sector to actually bolster all of this up. So he's got a very tough job, but he's an incredible man. He used to be deputy director of the NSA, I believe, and very smart. So when we look at it at the individual critical infrastructure level, one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, well, how do you even measure what is good? What is good protection? So in healthcare, so now I'm going to go into my industry. I serve as an officer of the SCC, that's the parent thing, all hazards. I'm the elected chair of the cyber working group underneath it. So we have about 800 people in the cyber working group and 350 organizations representing how to defend cyber attacks in healthcare. And then there's 15 task groups underneath all of that where we organize and deliver and produce, best practices and things along those lines. We're working right now on a 5-year plan, updating our 5-year plan, and figuring out what do we need to do on the sector side, what do we need from the government, minimum standards, reimbursements, what can Congress do, what should we be doing that's mandatory versus voluntary, all of those kinds of things in order to shore this stuff up. And then one of the big questions is well, how do we measure maturity in this space? Knowing that, when you think about this, so you got the NIST cybersecurity framework as an example, which is fantastic. That's what we all generally align around. But there is no real rubric on how to measure yourself to the NIST CSF. You might be able to do it for yourself and your own organization and then be able to determine your maturity steps, in tandem with that. But, you go to the next organization, and Bruce and I shared sort of our CSF, maturity methodology, we could be vastly different on how we did it. And so you could end up with a plus or minus 20% error ratio, which is terrible. A 40% error ratio in trying to determine how well you're doing is not something that you can sort of hold your hat to, as it were. So there's different thoughts on how to do this. One thought is just general awareness and participation and engagement of the critical infrastructure itself. So within healthcare, there's 6,000 hospitals roughly in the United States. How many of those hospital systems are actually participating in the critical infrastructure construct? That's one thing. I mean, and trust me, it's not 6,000. 350 is what I mentioned before. So when you look at it from that metric, we haven't even touched it, which is terrifying, in some way. But, that's okay. Not everybody is going to be able to do that. Not everybody has the resources to do that. You could look at, awareness of the materials that are produced, by these constructs. You can try to tackle creating an actual benchmark, a national benchmark on. CISA has recently just launched something, or getting ready to launch something. I have my own thoughts on it, called the Common Performance Goals Benchmark. It's coming very soon. I don't like it, but it's because it was done in a vacuum. But they're trying, that's their stab at, how can we get to some kind of measure on how well we're doing. It effectively is just a bunch of controls, at the end of the day. And they're calling it performance goals, but there's no goals, it's just controls. So there's a lot of discussion on here, very hard to tell, on where we're actually at. But there is a vested interest by leadership at the federal level and state and local level to actually protect all of this stuff, because we see what happens, with these attacks that are hitting us and the damage that it can cause.
Okay, so after the federal law passed, I'll make it simple. Is the arrow up, or is the arrow down, or did it stay the same?
You're trying to make it simple. I would say that the velocity is moving up. The actualization of have we turned the knobs to make it actually happen? I say we're pretty flat right now. But we've got the acceleration is starting, which is, when you think about revving the engine of a national protection infrastructure, I mean, that is not something you just do like that. It requires a ton of work, to get that thing rolling. We're probably a year or two away from really getting some major traction on it.
Other comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would actually second the arrow trending upwards. So there's an interesting, for those of you that may be familiar, the Information Security Forum is basically a collaborative between organizations where they would submit anonymously a lot of their assessment or audit reports, right, for the purpose of tracking where the trend is going. And if you take a look at it, to your point, in terms of controls implementation, there is increment, there is improvement across most areas, and actually across all areas. But one that's ramping up significantly faster than others is overall security program, leadership, governance, framework adaptation, and so forth. And that's what drives a lot of the subsequent implementation of controls, especially around the critical services sector, right? You need to have the framework in place, you need to have the governance in place, you need to have the drivers in place, the leadership in place that will subsequently implement these controls. So the ingredients that will push the rest of the industry, the rest of the controls up is certainly getting a stronger and stronger foothold. So that is increasing rapidly. And to that point, right, over the next couple of years, the actual controls that power a lot of these requirements will ultimately pick up.
Though is keep, this is now fourth question. This could be a sidebar. If you want to continue the discussion with any one of us, you have our contact information. So, and I did want to give someone else a chance.
Yes, one of the 16 sectors is the critical manufacturing sector. Given where we're at MxD, looking at the CISA side, it includes primary metals manufacturing, machinery manufacturing, engine power, earth moving, electrical motor, transformer generator. So, the question is, one is, follow up to the earlier piece, what is the maturity level of the critical manufacturing sector stream? And two is, even though it's very focused on those industries, is there something, is that set up in a way where folks that are manufacturers that are not in the critical manufacturing sector can leverage and harness, lessons learned, good practices for that?
So I do not know exactly how things are going in that particular sector because I'm not part of it. But what I can tell you is every sector has the SEC and GCSI, and every sector has an industry leadership construct. And so anybody who is in manufacturing and part of critical infrastructure, meaning that they're own and operate that actual infrastructure on behalf of their organization and the nation, they can join, and they should. Just like in healthcare, we have an open call to anybody in critical infrastructure to join. I don't get compensated for this work that I do. It's all pro bono, and it's all based on the national interest, essentially. So I would take that back. If you're in that critical infrastructure, I would go through CISA's site, which I think actually runs it for them, and you can probably get access to their core websites. Every sector organizes differently. There's no single charge on how it's built. Within the health side, we have a charter at the SEC level that describes how we're going to organize. The government side does something similar as well. So there isn't a standard, national standard that everybody must abide by. Instead, it's designed to be flexible so that you can build, contours around the needs that you have within your particular sector.
Yeah, one thing that I do want to add in the manufacturing sector specifically, I actually have a number of clients that we're supporting from that perspective. And on the IT side, it's actually not bad at all. On the IT side, it's great, it's getting significantly better. On the OT side, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. There's a big, oftentimes it's air gap, or oftentimes there's very little connectivity. And on the OT side, traditional vulnerabilities take months, if not years, if at all, to remediate, right? And one of the things we'll be talking about later on in the panel is about how to protect those specific use cases. But again, yeah, the OT side is definitely in dire need of improvement.
And I'm probably stating the obvious, but in terms of best practices, we're stealing liberally left, right, and center across sectors. I'm constantly reading things out of other sectors. If there's some bright idea that somebody has, but it's not a sector I'm operating in, I'm stealing it.
So what I want to do is take, looking at the time, we'll have two more of our set questions, and I want to let you know that the second of that is, what's the strangest story you've heard in your career? So that's the little carrot out there. But first, I think we need to, and I'm probably going to start with Anatoly on the next question, is I'm going to start it with a little personal story for, now I've been in industry for 40 years, okay? And as I said, a number of them were critical infrastructure. As you might guess from my lid here, there's one day a week when I'm unreachable. I always arranged for coverage. It was not a problem until I was filling in at the University of Chicago Medical Center as a CISO. That was the first time that it really struck home to me that these were individual life safety issues. And there was literally no comfortable zone for me to assign that to anybody else. So what I wanted to do is then pitch this question. What are the top few things to do to mitigate the risk of an attack? And then after the attack, the top few things that you would want to do, as a follow-on from that in reaction.
So I would say number one, and this was actually voiced loud and clear in the first presentation, is know your threats. Right? If you're going to protect your organization from something, you have to understand your threat landscape. And this goes beyond the traditional, by-the-book risk assessment. Do enterprise-level threat modeling to understand what am I actually going to be hit with in real world? What am I exposing? What's my attack surface? What are my assets? Second would be vulnerability management. And this goes not just fixing things, but also testing things. It's very often, so I have this unique perspective, I think, where I'm coming in from a service provider industry, right? And we work with clients all the time around these topics. And oftentimes when we engage in security testing and pen testing, we get a rule book saying, here's a list of things you can do, and here's a list of things you can't do. Well, attackers don't have that privilege, right? Attackers can, or I should say, attackers have a different privilege. They can do whatever they want and use any means necessary to actually gain foothold. The reality is any organization can and eventually will be broken. It's about preparedness. So from the vulnerability perspective, ensure there is parity between your testing efforts and what your threat model actually dictates. Remediate those vulnerabilities and prioritize not just based on CVSS scores, but also on weaponization of those attacks, of those vulnerabilities. That's a very important element. Another one that's super, super important is third parties. Don't trust them. I've had the pleasure of assessing, probably 2-3 dozen third-party security programs, TPRMs, and without exception, there were material gaps in each and every single one. And at the end of the day, what we usually rely to when an organization relies on a third party to perform services, they usually grant VPN access, and that VPN access typically goes, unfortunately, into an unrestricted space of their network infrastructure, network environments. There's very few organizations that I've run across of hundreds and hundreds that actually have proper segmentation for third parties. So don't trust third parties. Ensure your TPR program is comprehensive, but trust, but absolutely verify. I say those would be probably the top things, aside from, of course, invest in your defenses and maintain your defenses appropriately.
I'll go with my top five. They're pretty simple. I'll rattle them right off. Zero trust, machine learning, AI, quantum computing, and blockchain. Waiting for the nervous look to say it's serious. I'm muted. Okay.
Am I supposed to say bingo now?
I think mine is dying, but everybody can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah, it's kind of an awkward silence. No, but really, it all comes down. It's really actually three, and it's the three that we keep going for over and over and over again that keeps eluding us, and it is going back to the basics. It is, management vulnerabilities. It is, which really comes down to patching. Are you patching? Are you updating your software? Number one. Number two, misconfiguration, right? Misconfiguration kills us over and over again. And number three, identity and getting MFA. And if we can get those three down, all those other five things I rattled off are actually quite a bit of a distraction. You need to get good at those three.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic. I mean, when you look at, I was having a conversation last night with a vendor, and they sell in the OT space for medical, and they're like, we really need our product to be, how do we get this as part of like a best practice? And I was like, well, I'm going to tell you something I don't think you're probably going to want to hear, which is look at how all the attacks are happening against critical infrastructure, and tell me how many of those in healthcare have happened because a medical device was, had a vulnerability inside of it. How many of those has been the cause of a hospital system getting shut down? Like
2019 Cook County Hospital.
what was that?
2019 Cook County Hospital. Ransom attack.
Because of medical technology?
Yeah, well, it came from actually Cermak jail. Went to Cook County office in downtown and came back to Cook County Hospital.
So did it break in because they were pivoted through the medical tech, or did it come in through a third party or through something else?
Some of it was the devices they were using were Windows XP,
Sure, yeah.
X-ray machines.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, not to, where I'm going with this is, it's not that, they're part of a chain, of things. Is it the initial intrusion that's happening? No, the way we're getting beat is stupid stuff. It's hygiene, which is how we're getting beat. We have no 2FA on our VPNs. Our credentials are getting stolen through phishing. Our third party is getting hit, and they're coming in through a VPN connection that you've got in place. They get their beachhead, and then they move. So yes, I mean, it's involved like all these XP and the legacy things and all that stuff that's out there.
They're still manufacturing the Wi-Fi devices. They're not capable of AO 2.1x.
There's all kinds of that stuff. Like in healthcare, there's all kinds of issues, with you've got to have these devices have to, and in other critical infrastructure too. I mean, the devices have to perform in a specific way. And so there has to be certifications and accreditations and clearance in order for that to be done, in order for them to operate safely. You don't want a pacemaker that you can just tweak. I'm going to throw a patch on that sucker, and then boom, like it stops working. That's a huge problem. At the flip side, the same thing, the same way that you update the pacemaker through Bluetooth and all of that kind of stuff could it be vulnerable? Absolutely. Now, you can argue, do you know if any of this has actually happened? Because we don't really know inside these devices. They don't have logs. They don't have, good forensic capability. So it could be happening, and we just don't know it. But all of that said, we're getting beat with hygiene, or the lack of hygiene, and that has to be front and center. We're getting beat because we don't have good response. We talk about prevention all the time, and when we think like prevention's the only way to do this, it's got to be exercising and response, and having, looking at your RTOs and RPOs, your business continuity plans, and knowing what you're going to do before it hits. I mean, the way when I talk to my organization about this, I want you guys to be so bored of me coming to you and tabletopping and hearing the next ransomware thing. You're like, okay, here we go. Oh yeah, Eric. Okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. Not the like, holy cow, what can happen? You know, and the surprise that happens when you go through the exercise. We got any good team, you know, football team, baseball team, whatever. They're practicing all of that. And then the last thing I'll say is, Director Inglis he threw out an awesome charge, one that's in my head, and it will not leave until we figure out how to do it. So he charged our sector, and you know he's doing this with every sector, that we have to build this construct of critical infrastructure protection in such a way that you have to beat all of us to beat one of us. I was like, whoa, okay, that's opposite right now. You know, we are all operating independently of one another, and when we get hit, what's the first thing we do? We clam up. We stop talking. We don't share anything. We like our liability, because we're a very litigious society, and so if you say something, so lawsuits can happen, all kinds of other bad can occur, and so we got to flip that script. We need critical infrastructure to be participating in the ISACs. We need them to be sharing information into the ISACs so that everybody can use it, and we need the government to be declassifying the information they have and sharing back, so that we can use this, the intel to actually work.
That government, not this government?
Yeah. Could you get on that, Bruce, please?
I heard you say
I'm all over it.
Chicago is
Excuse me just a
private
bit, I'll be
sector
right
now,
back.
right? I heard that earlier.
So yeah, the question was back to likelihood and impact, right? So likelihood, my thoughts echo what my colleagues up here say. It's about doing the basics, getting the basics right, limit the likelihood that you're going to be attacked. So vulnerability management was mentioned a couple times. I love talking about vulnerability management, because we've got, in my opinion, a really good program. We've got a guy who's just all about vulnerability management. And, to me, that is holding IT operations accountable. Vulnerability management by itself doesn't do a whole lot of things. Produces some reports, you send some reports out to folks, you try to hold them to SLAs to address some things. But it's holding IT accountable for lifecycle management, don't have out-of-date stuff. Patch management, making sure you're patching things, and configuration management, making sure you're configuring it right. If you're doing those things, your vulnerability management reports are going to be boring. So I preach that left and right throughout my organization. Then impact, it's what Eric was talking about. It's doing your tabletops. It's being prepared for the recovery. It's building that resilient enterprise that says, we always talk about it. Hey, it's not if, it's when we're going to be attacked, blah, 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 blah. But it's actually, the reality of that, of being prepared for it, helping your organization become and be resilient. And that's the tabletops, that's making sure that your backups are, all the fancy words, immutable, blah, 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 blah. But, are they there? Have you tested them? Being able to recover, have a strategy to be able to bring your organization back, not just from a technical perspective, but from a business operations perspective. How do they operate while the technology's down, and then how do they recover that technology quickly?
One follow-up, I want to say just to what Eric said about information sharing. It's definitely a lack across the board. I've always said the threat actors share. You want to access into here? Sure, I'll provide you access. I do it for a fee. It's not altruistic, right? But they share and they collaborate really well. Certainly within the public safety sector, there has been nothing for a long time. I'm actually very happy to share that earlier this year, we actually stood up the first ever ISAO, Information Sharing and Analysis Organization for the public safety sector. It's called the Public Safety Threat Alliance. And we're partnered with DHS, with the FBI, with Secret Service, and we currently have well over 100 members and joining right now within public safety. But it's really important that we start sharing how we're being attacked and really understanding the tactics and adversarial tactic and techniques that are used in the wild, because everybody has a very limited set of resources, right? And so we got to make sure that we're allocating them in the most effective, pursuit of protecting the mission.
And I think we'll start to see more and more of this with the directives that are coming out of CISA. So for example, TSA has been issuing a number of requirements for airport operators, et cetera. And so there's a requirement that within 24 hours of an event that you've reported it back to CISA. So, and they're holding the operators accountable to that. So I think we're going to see more transparency. But you know,
They better
your point,
share
it's-
after they get it, because there's other laws coming too. Cercia is the other one, with 72 hours within a ransomware attack, and then 24 hours afterwards, they're required to share across the federal agencies. We need to get that back. You know, it's one thing to tell CISA, if they're doing nothing with it, then it doesn't help.
So our official, comments going into CISO, because we're responding to the RFI, is that they will share back with the ISACs and ISOs. They can't, it can't be one way only.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see some of that too. Recently got a call about something, and I want to say maybe the information was 2-4 hours old. So we're starting to see some improvements.
Yeah, so this is awesome. One other thing that I realized that we haven't touched upon is, again, how to actually limit that blast radius when an attack does happen. I know we talked about overall impact, but to the techies in the room, microsegmentation, time and time again. It gives you the ability to contain until you can remediate. And the better your microsegmentation strategy, regardless of the tools, it could be operational, procedure-based, whatever the case is, that's going to give you the ability to keep things contained. So while the attackers are trying to break out of that little sandbox that you've imposed them in, you have the opportunity to actually kill at that point in time. And of course, that requires good visibility in your SIM. That's a dependency. But microsegmentation, we found time and time again, doing incident response has been key to keeping things to more of a localized breach rather than a full organizational takeover.
And that's a great additional comment. Looking at the time, I wanted you to have them to have full reign and you to hear. I mean, there's more than a century of experience here. So, as scary as that sounds to say, but seriously, these are the gems you should be walking away with. But if this is the meat and potatoes, sometimes you walk away from a meal remembering the dessert. So 90 seconds apiece, a little bit running over. Do want to just ask what the wildest stories. I'm going to start because I probably have the weakest, wildest story. But I did mention I worked at a Nexus, which was half the U.S., a couple hundred of us, half the U.S., $1 trillion a year of tax withholding. And at one point, I had the DHS line of business, but the IRS line of business was the main line. And Jamie Pocklov comes in, plops himself down in my office, and goes, IRS just called. Okay, what is it, Jamie? He goes, I said, this is the best, buddy, can you spare a dime story. They said, you know, we're having a little trouble meeting payroll this quarter. Can you advance us a little? And Jamie goes, well, sure, you know, it's your money anyway. What do you need? And they're going, can you do 600? No, make it 650 million. And by Thursday. And Jamie goes, sure. And then he hangs up and he goes, how the hell do I transfer that amount of money? I mean, that's a little bit more than what Venmo can do. Anyway, so that was my story. And let's see, who do we, Bruce first.
Sure. I don't know how wild. Adam, in our email communications before this, Adam kind of made me up my game here for wildest story.
My expectations are high, Bruce.
So let's see. I'll start with, so my first week on the job, day one, you know, meet the team, meet my boss, aside from, you know, the interviews and what have you. Day two, I'm sitting in my office, getting logged in, and one of my team comes to the door and is like, the FBI's at the door. Oh, okay. Day three, I think, and this is public information. We had a cyber event. Day four, we implemented our newly minted cyber insurance policy for the first time. So within 4 days, those were the first 4 days on the job. So a little bit of baptism by fire.
So my story is actually more on the policy level than anything else. So I mentioned that I'm involved in a lot of development of tools and things like that. So one of the task groups that I lead, in addition to chairing the cyber working group, is called the 405D task group. And we effectively built cyber hygiene for healthcare. It's voluntary. It's required. Or it's under the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 was how it got charged. And as I was, as we were going through this, we had about 250 people that were in the task group, writing, developing, editing, et cetera. I was invited to Congress, Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health, to talk about what's the state, this is back in 2017, the state of healthcare cyber. And I had a member ask me the question, you know, on C-SPAN. My mother gave me all kinds of jokes, like all the blue hairs, you're gonna be like famous amongst the blue hairs, and you know, and it's awe-inspiring for sure, like sitting in the chambers and talking to them. And they asked me the question, like, well, when is this publication coming out? You know, your hygiene and standards. I said, oh, it's going to be at the end of this year. You know, because I was talking with my counterpart in HHS. She's my co-lead, and we're like, yep, we're going to get this out by the end of the year. It's all going to be good. And it's like, cool. I was naive then as to the bureaucratic machine of the federal government. And so finished that and come back in the next week. I check in with my partner in crime. She's like, yeah, Eric, we got a little problem. I was like, what? She goes, well, you just committed to Congress that we're going to have this document out by the end of the year, and we're not sure we can do that. And I was like, oh, well, we've been talking about this. She was like, yeah. I was like, okay, did I just get in trouble here? We did produce it December 28th, 2017. It was released, so we hit the mark. And it was fun. It was a fun way to sort of like push the federal government along into getting something done. So there you go.
Adam, are you as disappointed as I am that that story had nothing to do with Star Wars?
Yes.
That's a good point.
I was sure the Mandalorian was going to insert somewhere in there.
Put Mandalorian in.
Or at least Baby Yoda. Okay, I will have to redact this to protect the innocent, but this is actually a fairly recent event and very interesting. It does get back into the notion of the supply chain and the interesting things that can happen there. This is the public safety, critical infrastructure sector we're talking about. A system out there that we have visibility into picked up that a certain third-party software, actually security software, interestingly, that was running the system, another security piece of software detected a virus, and the vendor A's security software detected a virus or malware in vendor B's security software. Okay, that's interesting. Vendor B's was contacted by the public safety agency to alert them that they found it was actually Russian malware specifically inside this, to which the vendor said, oh, we are aware. Is that wild, the story? I'm still spinning over this one. And it was in their newest update, and they were aware when they did the update that this malware was in there. I guess we got to ship at the end of the day, right? We got to ship.
Good story.
That's awesome. Mine is probably about how we accidentally helped a major software development organization that delivers certain software product that's installed across all sectors, how we accidentally helped them prevent having to invalidate their code citing cert. So back in my data protection DLP days, this client of ours had the opportunity to go in, and obviously the challenge was, hey, how do we actually prevent exfiltration of source code? And source code, if any one of you has ever tried to do source code security or preventing exfiltration, it's notoriously hard because the majority of source code is based on either open source libraries or packages, right? So there's actually very little actual custom code out there. And just firing off an alert on any piece of source code, it's non-essential because you raise an alert and it's going to say, well, no, it's not real. Right, so we had a number of brainstorming sessions, and one of the sessions, the idea from one of the guys came up is, hey, let's write a custom parser to take all the source code, it's in the repositories, let's extract all of the function names, variable names, class names, and so forth. Let's compare that against the open source repositories that we have access to. Let's do a diff, and then based on that, we're going to extract a list of keywords. We're going to look at those keywords being exfiltrated via all possible channels. Great, awesome, cool. Wrote a prototype, it worked brilliantly. But this, POC worked brilliantly, put this in production. A couple months later, we're done with the engagement, everything's awesome. A couple of months later, meeting with the client, having a dinner conversation, and they brought up an instance where accidentally the parser that we wrote parsed out the keywords that said begin certificate that was actually in one of the repositories that or one of the code bases that we checked out. So somebody actually hard-coded a generic certificate, not a code signing cert. But that keyword of begin certificate made its way into the list of keywords that we were looking for through their exploitation channel, through the DLP. And sure enough, one day it triggered on a random Saturday morning, and lo and behold, that event got blocked, right? So that obviously went through the investigation process, and they found that a developer was trying to actually send a bunch of source code and certificates to a personal account, and that was, yeah. But that was blocked, that was stopped, and we kept, again, millions and millions of software installs from being invalidated. So that was kind of awesome.
That's crazy. I will mention that when I was at AT&T, where there was 5 million lines of code, largest single code base outside of Lawrence Livermore, we felt that the best way to prevent exfiltration is just give all that code and all those bugs to every competitor. Let them party it.
We said the same thing. We had a very old code base that had been maintained millions and millions of lines, and we always said we should give it to our competitors. That'll keep them confused for years.
So with that, I do want to close this segment. I want to thank the panelists for their time, and I want to return it to Larry.
Thank you so much, Glenn, Bruce, Eric, Anatoly, and Adam. Great panel discussion. Okay, we're running a little bit behind. It's our networking break. Lots of questions have been coming in over the break about the Wi-Fi. It's on the back of your badge. So if you want to connect to the free Wi-Fi, MxD visitors, there's also signs in the back. However, as you all know, you should be doing it through secure VPN or something like that, or use your own secure Wi-Fi hotspot. Women's washrooms are directly across from the door. The men's washrooms, same floor, on the other side. Refreshments are available. Please be back in the room, if at all, by 11 o'clock, so we can get back on track. Thank you.
Hotspot back with the university is going to be. What's that? I'm paying for my own phone now. I'll tell you what, my office will get, I'll have, we had no internet in the house. We get in the office, fire up. Only how we did was, you mentioned they set up this program every huge bandwidth. Yeah. For whatever reason, right, where she did this, and then it will pass bandwidth through the 3G. It was easy to tell. It's like, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Advisors. I hadn't had that.
Yeah, been a while. I was not aware. Definitely.
Day jobs like, hey, can you like,
But
put presentation on, like,
I know what you're getting ready to say. Yeah, all the work.
Good to meet you. Thank you very much.
I can't even, I don't even know how to include like.
Right, yeah.
I got 2 banks there. So like, you know what I mean? So I can't get it. System operate OTIT. And I'm like, listen.
Yeah, okay, so
Don't even come close to that.
you'd still be in that advisor, like
70 years, dude. He said you retired in 2017.
health sector.
Years.
Really?
Here in Germany.
there's gonna be some good.
I'm sure.
All of my presentations are done. I'm supposed to get through to the national team.
So like, again, I'm on schedule tomorrow morning, tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Tell me it's not no. Talking about something. Yeah, you didn't do here. Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Sometimes
You don't know how time zones work, so. So what if I said no? What if I was like,
senior at the naval, all those things, that's why it's damn submarine came in. Getting to the small thing. Good.
actually, I want to do something.
I can't talk about it.
You might-
Oh, they got the invite.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. They do a classification here, you know, so they were pulling all the stops trying to get us to go. Yeah. I mean, it's like so hard to tell me. I said, I can't even tell you what I can't tell you. This is getting frustrating. Still rather because where so I called the French show. We start the show was really interesting. Reviewing some of the we had some what do you guys say about basic that's just but that's us talking around so she's like but then we also
their own teams do it, but it's cool that there's this awareness, but it shows also lack of operation.
the interesting thing is the stuff I know in test with fire sources.
Right, that's why I said come a long way.
You know, but we want to get engaged you know, you're saying more Soviet submarines. You can definitely say that. It's like the Navy, I know that. We're strong out with that.
So it's a consortium of organizations.
When did they open the
You're gonna have
Johnny going to
Oh yeah. Like their conference is so last, like in September, they're like October, November, since I'm hearing. Yeah, it's going. So Johnny had like,
Yeah. The other one, I came in as part of that. Piecing that, there was a Soviet battle group in town from the Pacific, down the west coast, and then went across Hawaii and rode between Maui and that town. And broke down. It's in Hanoi. Dollar amounts, but in this country,
yeah. There were 5 stars across the board.
There were 4 or 5.
Yeah. 2.83. Which, what do you think of that?
You know, massive.
Okay.
$14 million acquisition, and they're like, of course, they got.
No, we've done a bunch of them.
You know,
Like, I thought my job was to just get ratings, right?
The-
So I'm
running
running
our
SC, started off.
So
we have my research.
when I say total plus or minus 20% error rate, I mean it's like it's insane. It's so like you know, and I've been
They're kind of,
I mean I've been hammering this as well. But and how am I measuring myself?
this whole time, like, I assumed that other distributing and
I don't have to
things like that. Have a mailing list, right? And then apparently it was only going into the proprietary.